All right, folks, good morning again. This is Magnus with BubbleWraps.net, and we're going to do this video about what to expect when you get your decals initially shipped to you. Cover some questions I routinely get asked, because I know a lot of people, especially when you're putting the ice wrap on your check surface, there's going to be a lot of apprehension, shaving those ramps off, making the required cuts. And I get it. You spend a lot of money on your checks. You've probably spent, $100 to $300 on your decals, and it can be a little bit apprehension there as you start tackling your project. So I'm going to cover some helpful tips. Brent Musgrave, who I send you his video every time, he's the guy who pioneered doing this ice wrap stuff, and he did a really good set of install videos, very detailed for removing and reinstalling your ramps, getting the ice sheet positioned and everything cut out, applying your full ice surface wrap. So I'm not going to completely duplicate his work because he's pretty much laid it out better than I ever could, and his wraps and my wraps come from largely the same template, so there isn't much difference there. So I'll cover a few different tips that I've found in doing some projects now myself that might help you and alleviate some questions. So first thing I ask, when you get your decals from me, they're going to come shipped in a box. They're going to come all in a long rectangular box. They're going to be all rolled up with all your inside dashboard pedestal. All your smaller decals are going to be wrapped up inside your ice wrap. So slip that little piece of tape that binds it all together, lay it out flat, and the first thing I'm going to ask you to do is make sure everything's there. I use a printer that's remote, so a lot of times, unless it's local or I'm doing your install myself, I won't actually lay eyes on your decals when they ship, just because these printers can't compete, or local printers that I've used can't compete price-wise and quality-wise with these guys, and it's just better for you in the long run from a price point and a quality standpoint if I use an offsite shipper. So these will drop ship straight to your house. So the first thing, make sure everything's there. I mean, this particular project is a full North Stars commemorative table. So we're doing the whole table, and there's a lot of pieces to it. I think there's 20 pieces. So when your decals ship to you, I'm going to shoot you an email that says how many pieces you should expect to receive, especially how many are individual pieces and how many, in some cases, might be duplicates. So you can go through, when you get them, open them up, count all your pieces, make sure you got everything you're supposed to get. It doesn't happen often, but the printers are human. Sometimes things get missed. That way, the sooner I know, the sooner I can get a replacement on the way to you. So in this case, full project here. Obviously, we've got our ice wrap. Got 4 pieces of interior dashboards. We got 4 pieces of outside bubble decals. We got a full checks cabinet side, and 2 checks cabinet end decals. Got our pedestal decals, 1 for each player side. Got our main pedestal side decal, and also this is an older Super Checks digital scoreboard, so there's 4 separate pieces for the scoreboard decal. So in all, this project has 20 pieces. So whatever number of pieces I told you should be expecting, count them, make sure you got everything before you get too far down the road. So once you've done that, also I just ask that you roll everything out, just get everything kind of inspection, look for any damage, any glaring printing defects, blotches or lines. It rarely happens that there's any printing defects. Occasionally, just due to shipping, sometimes there might be, particularly ice sheet, maybe there's a little tear or a gouge, which I want to know about so they can get a replacement shipped to you as quickly as possible. You will notice just from it getting rolled up, especially on an ice sheet, you might see a few wrinkles here and there. That isn't going to be a problem. Those will all smooth out perfectly fine once you're rolling out. But we're looking for any visible printing defects, any tears, any gouges, any rips, things like that aren't just going to smooth out. So sooner you let me know when you do decals that anything like that has happened, which is rare, but again, things do happen. The sooner you let me know, the sooner I can get a replacement on their way to you. So once you've verified the condition and the number of decals you've got, what I like to do, this isn't necessary, but everything has been rolled up for several days for the shipping process. So I like to, particularly the ice sheet, I like to roll everything out on a nice flat surface. If you have somewhere you can lay it out on like a table for a day or two, I just like to let everything flatten out and get as much of the curl out of the vinyl as you can. That'll definitely help you with the install process. Again, it's not required, but it definitely does help out, especially if you're trying to do this yourself. So what we're going to be doing today is we're going to install, this is a old Met Center in Bloomington, Minnesota ice surface that we're doing for our North Stars table. We are going to apply it to this spare Ice Checks surface. This is an old Phoenix Coyote one that doesn't really matter because we're going to cover it up. But this is a fairly new surface, and we're going to apply the ice surface wrap to this. So obviously, first thing that's going to have to happen, take it off your table. It is very hard. It's a lot harder to do this when it's on your checks, trying to work around the dome and getting these things cut out with the dome hinge sitting there and cables and everything else. Just go ahead, disconnect any wires, get your nets out, pop your players off, and just go ahead, take your ice surface off, lay it out on a flat surface. It'll make your life so much easier. And if you're doing any kind of end cabinet decals, chances are you're going to have to remove the ice surface to do that anyway. So take your ice sheet off. It isn't very hard to do. Lay it on a flat surface and get your ice wrap applied that way. So talk about some of the tools. If you've seen Brett Musgrave's video, obviously you're going to have to remove the molded plastic ramps that go behind your net and in the corners. So they come off fairly easily. The catch is, like Brett said, they're not glued on, they're actually bonded on. So you actually have to cut through a very thin layer of plastic that adheres these to the ice surface to get them off. And again, this is probably gives people the most trepidation when trying to do this themselves. They're worried about cracking or breaking their ramp or damaging their ice surface. Really, I'm going to go through this again. Brett does a good job of it. I'm going to go through it again. And again, if you have the right tools and you take it slow, it really isn't anything to worry about. They generally come off really fairly easily. As long as you kind of are patient and take your time. Now this is a new ice surface. These are nice, new, pliable, not old and brittle. If you've got an older Checks, some of your ramps you've noticed are yellowed. Yeah, that plastic's going to be a little more brittle, a little more fragile, so you have to be extra careful. If you do happen to crack one at some point in the process, it isn't the end of the world. It's not going to affect the functionality, or really once everything's in place and your bubble's back down, aesthetically, you won't really even notice it. In worst case, if you're worried about it, you can get on the Ice Games website, go to their parts section, and you can order replacements if you want. They're all the same size, so feel free to do that if you're a little bit worried about it. But generally, if it's a fairly recent check game or a new ice sheet, they should be hold up just fine. You'll be able to get them off and back on without any damage. So having said that, it's important to have the right tools to do this stuff, getting the ramps off in particular, and when it comes to cutting out the player tracks. So what I like to use for this is just a retractable straight edge razor blade scraper. If you don't have one, if you got a Harbor Freight, I think it's like $2.99. You can pick one of these things up, and obviously Home Depot, Lowe's are going to have these as well. It is well worth your time and money if you don't have it. Spend a little bit of expense, because having something like this, as opposed to just kind of more of a standard box cutter or any other thicker scraper, is going to save you a lot of time and hassle. So for getting the ramps off, I have found nothing that works better than one of these retractable razor blade scrapers. Another thing, when it comes down to trimming the vinyl, you're going to have to trim the player tracks at the end. You're going to have to cut out the holes for the gold crease there. Again, you could use a larger razor blade like this, a carpet knife type thing. But again, this is fairly large. It's a little unwieldy, and as you're trying to get some of these detailed curves, it's a lot easier if you go get on Amazon. If you don't have one, buy yourself a little fine point pen knife, X-Acto knife. This will make things so much easier in the process that it's well worth your time to have one. You'll make much finer, much smoother cuts, and your end results will turn out better because of it. So you need a scraper, get yourself a little pen knife. I like to have just a little dry erase or waterproof, not a Sharpie, not a permanent marker, but a small marker to make some marks. A small ruler, and I'll show you when we get to doing actually applying ice wrap. A roll of masking tape actually doesn't hurt. It can help you out if you're doing this by yourself. So you notice on this side of the table, I've already removed the ramps. And for just to show people who are worried that removing the ramps is going to damage your ice surface, again, if you're deliberate and careful, you can see really You can see a brief outline of where these ramps sat, but there's really no gouges, and there's a little bit of dirt there because it's sat in my garage for a little bit, but there's not really any gouges, any residue left from those ramps. You don't really have to worry about damaging your ice surface. And again, here's the underside of the ramps. Again, there's not really even, I was able to get these off without even really cutting into the plastic at all. There's no damage to the ramp. There's a little bit, you can see a little bit of residue from where that bonding took place. But again, these are pretty resilient. It's a very resilient ice surface in particular. You don't have to worry about damaging the ice surface if you do it correctly and take your time. Now, one thing you will, and I do get this question a lot, is, all right, you get this ice surface on, obviously here you can see a bit of an outline of where the ramps go back into place, but once you get your new ice sheet on, those are going to disappear. And yeah, if these came off this easily, sometimes if there's a little ridge there, you will see the ridge. The vinyl adheres so tightly and is so thin, you can sometimes make that outline out and you can just physically see where to put that ramp back on when you're done. But sometimes like this one might be a little tough because that came off pretty cleanly. So in cases like this where maybe they come off so cleanly, I'm not sure I'm going to be able to see through the vinyl where these go back on, I always take a bit of a measurement, especially for this corner ramp, until I know exactly where it goes. So that's the purpose for the marker and this little straight edge ruler. I'll take a measurement from this side and this side of where this particular corner is. That way I just have a place to start from when I readhere this, reattach this ramp at the end of the whole process. So in this case, this particular one is about 3.5 inches from this edge and 2 3/4 from the back edge. So 3.5 by 2 3/4. I make a little note of that. I'll also probably measure, so this is parallel to the edge of the ice. I may just take a measurement there. So that is 1 1/4. So at least with those two measurements, I can put a little, when I'm done, put a little dot on the vinyls where that corner is going to cover up, so I know where to start when I reapply the ramp. Same thing in this one. With the one behind the goal, it's not as critical because you can center this one up just using, visually especially using this hole there. Where the center point is, where that bolt goes. And also, I like waiting to put this ramp back on until the goal is back in place, because if you put this a little too far forward or too far back, especially if you've done one of the aftermarket, BubbleWraps.net, something like that, they're a little bit bigger than the default check, so you might have to adjust, the location of this ramp, a fraction of an inch to account for that, so it doesn't rub up against the net. So this one you can more or less eyeball once you get the net back in and the ice is back on your table. But this one can be a little bit tough, so I particularly like to take a little bit measurement there. Another thing you can do is, again, with this little non-permanent marker, you can make a little mark on the edge too, and kind of use that as a reference. You'll be able to see that because the vinyl is going to cover anything you put on the top. But you could do that as well. I like just getting it off the straight edge, making a little measurement, jotting it down on a post-it, and then I can remeasure when I attach things again. Okay, so first things first, we've cleared off our table. I got that ice wrap out of the way. I don't want it anywhere near this blade as I'm doing this. So obviously the first thing, and again, the thing that gives people the most apprehension, is getting these ramps off. So if you have the right tool, which is this thin razor blade scraper, and you take your time, it isn't that big of a deal. So I'm going to start with the one behind the ramp. It's usually a little bit easier to get off than this one. And again, Brett's video does a real good job of this, but just to reiterate, what you're trying to do is you're just trying to get this blade underneath the edge. You're not pushing down, you're not pushing too far up because you don't want to slit the plastic, but you're just trying to slide this blade along the surface of the ice just to get under there. You don't even need to apply much pressure. You're just trying to get under there and slice that bond. So you're not really necessarily cutting, it's not a cutting motion, it's just kind of more of a rocking back and forth motion. And so I'm going to start just on one flat edge here, and I'm not pressing terribly hard. All I'm doing is just rocking this blade back and forth very slowly. And I'll get a little ways and I'll just start And I get to this point right here and I can really feel it sliding in. So I'll work that area a little bit, rock it back and forth. You don't want to do a big back and forth motion. If you do that, a big rocky motion, you risk getting these corners might gouge a little bit of your ice surface. So you don't want to really do that with too much downward pressure, but you're just kind of doing a very little, and I don't know if you heard that, but when you break that bond, you'll hear a little pop, a little crack there. And that means, okay, so that little section's done, so then I'll just keep slowly working down a little bit at a time. All the way down the length. Again, all I'm doing, I'm not putting a whole lot of forward pressure into this. I'm just kind of letting the blade do the work by just slowly rocking it back and forth. And with a nice sharp blade, it's going to work its way through that bond. And that's not applying too much upward pressure, on the base of the ramp. It's just sliding along the surface. You notice on some of these ramps, it's not bonded the whole length of the ramp. It tends to be concentrated in the corners. The corners need a little more work. I need to be a little more careful there. But usually these straight edges, particularly on this behind the goal ramp, are not that difficult. And again, now we're getting towards the corners. You start to get a little more difficult. There's a little more bonding there. And again, I'm just not going to force it. I'll do a little bit at a time. I'll just keep working my way around bit by bit. Start working this far edge. Alright, pretty much got that edge. I'm going to rotate the whole ice sheet here just so I can get the better access to the opposite side. I'll start working the sides now. If you get to a spot that's a little too tough, just go ahead and move somewhere else and come back to it. All right, here's one half of it. Just got one side left to do. And some of them come off easier than others. I've got these off in as little as 5 minutes. Some of them I've worked on, especially an older yellowed one that the plastic's a little more brittle. Sometimes it's taken, a half hour. But there we go. I didn't take much work. This came off pretty cleanly. I haven't gouged the surface. All right, so there's our behind the goal ramp. Now we'll start on this one. This is the one in the corner is a little bit more difficult because there aren't as many flat surfaces. You kind of got this back edge, but everything else is kind of rounded and curved. So it's a little more challenging, but again, you take your time, it's not going to be difficult. And these ones in particular, I kind of like to start working, again, this kind of back corner, this back edge, just to get it started, and doing nothing different. We're just slowly rocking our blade back and forth, trying to get under there. And again, if you do it slow and just kind of keep moving around, you're not going to damage anything. And again, if it gets too hard, just move on to a different spot and just kind of do it bit by bit. Like I said, I'm not doing this whole edge all at once. I'm kind of moving it back and forth and just slowly working it. And once it starts coming, it comes pretty easily. Again, I want to be careful. There's a little extra bonding around every corner, so I want to be a little careful when I get to the edges. Again, not forcing it. This front edge of this one's proven a little more difficult, which, you know, isn't the end of the world. It just means I got to take a little more time and just do it bit by bit till I gradually work my way through the bonding material. And eventually you will get it. All right, there we go. Both ramps are removed. I don't know how well that'll show up, but again, that's pretty clean. If you do have some ridges along here, you can just take very lightly and run your razor blade over the base outline of where the ramps went, just to shave off any little bit of residue from the bonding. But in this case, there really wasn't much left. Just a little bit right there. All right, again, that took me, what, maybe 10 minutes, 15 at the most. Again, slow, deliberate. They will come off. Just take your time and use the correct tool. Right, now we are ready to install our full surface vinyl ice wrap. So again, key to this is a nice flat surface with plenty of room to work around. Got our ice wrap here. You know, again, a second pair of hands helped, but I'm going to do this myself. I've had to do it myself on several tables. So if you're stuck by yourself, you can still do it. I'll show you some tips and tricks here to try and get it done as painlessly as possible. But again, if you got a second person that can grab the other end of this and help you get it positioned, it really is the easiest way. But again, this is a pretty forgiving vinyl until you, as far as adherence goes, until you really press down on it. So you've got plenty of opportunity, even if you're working by yourself, to reposition it as needed. First thing you want to do is you want to find the center point of your ice. This particular one, you notice on each player end, there's 3 bolt holes where the dome bolts back down. There happens to be one right in the center. So the center of this rear bolt hole right here is the center of your ice sheet. And notice on the ice wraps, I've gone ahead and I always put a little black tick mark. I don't know if you can see that at the center point of your ice. So in order to center these back up, all you're going to do is match that little black tick mark on the vinyl wrap with the center point of your ice surface. You can, if you want, you can want to take that little waterproof marker, just so you have something to see, maybe just on the edge, because again, your ice wrap is going to cover pretty much close all the way to the edge, so you may not see any marks, or you may not see that bolt hole. So I might take the marker and just make a little black tick mark on the edge of the ice surface that no matter what, I'll still be able to see. So that might help you out as well. Other thing, make sure you check out before you start this. Notice, so your ice sheet, once you remove from the table, there's a big cutout around here that on one side of it, this is where the hinge goes. So your bubble is going to hinge down that way. So, if you've got your checks up against the wall, chances are this is the side that's going to be up against the wall, because this is the cable, this is the notch where the ribbon for your scoreboard comes out. Your cord on your pedestal is going to come out at the base of the pedestal that way. That way, if your center ice design or any logo that you want facing, outside away from the wall, just make sure that that's going to face this way, because this is the hinge side of the dome. If your checks is in this middle of the room, then it really doesn't matter. But someone who shall remain nameless, when they did their first wrap, put their beautiful new ice sheet logo on facing the wrong way. So we won't mention who that is. This particular one doesn't really matter. This is an old school NHL one, so there's not a big center ice logo, but if I had a big current logo for a current NHL rink that is designed to be looked at from one side, obviously I'd want I want the side that I'm probably going to be viewing it is probably going to be from over here, not over here if your check is up against the wall. So double check that, because once you start hearing it, it becomes a big pain to reverse things. So that's the only word of caution there. So again, doing this yourself, what I like to do to start is, I don't want this table or this ice surface sliding around on me, so that's why I got this little roll of tape. And again, you might want to do this if you've got a partner helping you as well. Just slippery surface on a flat table sometimes can pose problems. So I just definitely when I'm doing it myself, I just take some non-marring painter's masking tape. And again, this can come up later. We'll have to before we completely put down the ice surface, but I'll just very, it doesn't need a lot of tape, but right along the edge there so I can still peel it up. And I'll do it on this back side too. There you go. Just that way now, as you're adhering the ice, and especially when you get to the point where you're smoothing out bubbles, now your ice sheet isn't going to slide around on you, so it'll make it a little bit easier. So first thing you want to do, especially if you're doing this yourself, is you want to get it lined up and straight so that this tick mark ends up in the center point of your ice sheet, and that tick mark ends up in the center point of your ice sheet. Notice I kind of covered up that tick mark I made, so I'll make one more just on the tape. Now I know where my center points are. So when I'm doing this myself, I'll just start at one end, and all I'm going to do is peel up one corner basically just one edge of the backing just to get myself started. So I'll peel off a corner and just fold the backing back over on itself like so. I don't like removing it. You don't want to remove too much backing all at once when you're doing this by yourself. If you're doing it with a friend who can just keep the ice sheet from folding over on itself, by all means, you can take all the backing off at once, lay it straight down. But if you're trying to do this by yourself, this kind of flops around, and the last thing you want is for this sticky side to flop over and start adhering to itself. That can be kind of a pain to get unstuck. So I'm going to start with this edge. I'm going to bring it to my center point. On the edge of the ice sheet and line it up as best I can just visually here. Mesh up that corner. The center's pretty much in the center. Walk around, and I want to do the same in this corner. You see a couple bubbles there, so again, beauty of this material. Can lift it up and reposition it without any problems. All right, that's pretty much, that's good enough for now. I'm just gonna lightly tack it down with my finger. Now I'm gonna come across to this end and see, and yeah, I can see my center point here is now lined up with the center point I made on the tape. So kind of my trick for doing this, now that I got it laid out, is I'm going to take some more tape. And just to keep this from shifting around too much, I'm going to take another strip of tape here. And I am now just going to tape one more layer now. This time is adhering this edge of the vinyl wrap to the table as well. So now I got the vinyl adhered in position, and I've got the underlying check surface beneath it kind of stuck in position, so stuff won't shift around on me as I peel the rest of this backing off. So I'll do that. And that should hold the vinyl in enough position that now I can move things around and it's not gonna come loose on me over there, and it's gonna stay centered. So, all right, I'm gonna lift up my ice wrap. I'm gonna kind of grab this, remember there's this tab of backing material that I folded over on itself. Now I can get at it from this side of the table. And I can just kind of slowly peel that off as I'm laying this wrap back down on the surface, keeping it as flat and straight as I can. Yeah, I'm keeping a little bit of tension on the ice wrap. Stop halfway there. Make sure I'm still pretty well lined up with my center point. You know, if you start going off one side or the other, if you lay it back down, you'll notice if your center point here gets too far off to the side. So I'll do a few inches at a time. Still on center. Now at this point I've gotten to center ice. So I want to, feel the center ice dot. I'm going to push down too hard, but I can feel the center ice dot is right over the cutout for the puck eject. So now I know I'm still pretty well centered up at the halfway point. And we'll finish this off. And we're just kind of letting, once the backing's peeled off, we're just kind of letting the vinyl match, lay down, straight down where it is. And again, with everything taped in place, everything is just kind of laying down nice and flat. We're not torquing it or putting any kind of side load on it so it gets out of position. So this is the way I've found, again, if you're stuck doing this by yourself, this is the best way I've found to be able to do this. Alright, so now our backing is done, and then if you can see it, but there is our center point is nice and aligned. Looks like either edge is pretty well aligned. I mean, there are some bubbles here that, and now that the backing is gone, I'm just going to lift up and stretch the vinyl back out to help get rid of those larger wrinkles. And again, you see, I'm able to lift this stuff up very easily. It's sticking, but it isn't sticking hard enough yet that I can't reposition. If it gets a little bit off one way or the other, can peel it far enough off, adjust it, lay it back down. All right, so once you've got the majority of the bubbles out, now I'm done with this. I notice I got a little crease or a little wrinkle right there, so I'm going to have to adjust this in. So now everything's there. I'm going to peel off the tape that just temporarily held that edge in place. Now I'll do the same on this. I'll just carefully peel up this edge. Stretch the vinyl a little bit. Get that big crease out of there. And really, that was not that bad. So now everything, again, I could take this whole wrap off at this point and reposition it if I wanted to. But again, if you do it slowly and keep everything taped down so it doesn't move, you shouldn't really have to do that other than, like I said, getting a few larger wrinkles out if they happen to develop. So now all I do is I start at the center and I'm going to start pressing it down a little more to get it to adhere. I'm just going to lightly with my hand, I just start at the center and I just kind of flatten it out to the side and then towards either end. And again, any little air bubbles that or wrinkles that do happen to be there, all you just find a little bubble and I just kind of press it out to the nearest edge and it'll work its way out. pretty good center ice in the neutral zone, so I'll just keep working my way across the ice sheet just with the palm of my hand. There's all the pressure you need at this point. So I think I mentioned before that if these ramps come up very cleanly, you're not going to see much of an outline where these ramps were. And this one, it's probably not going to show up on the video, but for this goal one, you know, this vinyl is so thin and it, you know, it takes the contour of the underlying surface so well that I can just barely make out the outline of where that ramp went. So I can use that when I re-adhere it at the end. And, you know, probably about the same on this one. This one's a little hard, but I can just barely make out the outline of where that ramp was. So I can use that to reposition the ramp at the end. So once we have all the wrinkles and bubbles worked out to the end, that's the point now I can take my hand and start applying a lot more pressure to really get this vinyl to adhere well. So I'm gonna start the center again, work my way out, just with more pressure than I was using before, work my way to the edges. And before we get too far here, we've got everything where we want it. I can remove the tape before we really stick this vinyl down. Remove the tape that was holding the ice surface to our table. All right, I'm gonna let that sit for a little bit. I may come back and do it again in a little bit, but all right, that is pretty much it for adhering the initial surface. Obviously, we'll flip this over. You know, we're obviously now gonna have to take that fine point X-Acto knife. We're gonna have to cut out, you know, around the goals, the goalie slot, the player tracks, you know, and here along the edge for the hinge. But I like to do that once it's back on the table. With the goals, you know, and we'll get the goals in place there, so I'm not going to do it, you know, it's easier, instead of trying to cut through and hold it up and do it, once it's back on the table, you'll have some space on the other side to stick your knife through. It just works out easier that way. So, but there is my North Stars project vinyl ice wrap applied, and again, works great if you got two people, but I want to do this video just to show that, you know, if you don't, there's a way to do it yourself. Again, like everything with these projects, the vinyl's forgiving, take your time, and you can get it done one way or the other. So, all right, again, we'll pick back up when this is back on the table, ready to cut out the slots and the goal mouths and trim it up once it is in place. Thanks for watching.